So, like Daniel said, we're from Union, and I'm here with Marcelo today, and we're just going to talk a little bit about our progress in one of our work for all mankind. But to tell you a little bit about Union, Union was created in 2008 by Tim Kaplan and Adam Gascoigne, and they basically worked in other massive VFX companies, but they thought it was their turn to, take the jump and make their own VFX studio. And of course, with all of the experience and knowledge, it was quite easy for them to jumpstart the whole company to what it is today. Their first project was 127 hours for Danny Boyle, and Danny is a director who work with a lot. So this is a picture of all of us in the stairs of the studio. Of course, some people have left, some people have joined, but the main core team is there. And we have about 100 people with a mix of 2D, 3D, and effects. And yeah, here we are. This is our studio. This is some of the films and TV series we've worked on. We mainly specialize in environment and invisible effects. And although we do smaller projects to some of the bigger companies, we do have a lot of creative freedom because we work quite closely with directors, and it gives us the opportunity to propose ideas. And more often than not, those ideas are taken upon. And you get to have your own little bit of creativity in the films, which is always a nice touch. We use Nuke. I know some of the people here might be younger and might not know what that is. That is the software we use for compositing. And then we use Houdini or Maya for the 3D side, which is more of Marcelo's speciality. So at Union, we try not to pigeonhole an artist into a corner. Because the industry is usually divided between 3D and 2D. But if it is something you're interested in and you're mainly doing comp, you can also try 3D. And it's something we're quite open to because as a smaller company, we do need a broad range of skills, and it's always useful to be able to pick and mix from various disciplines quite easily. Yeah, so just move on. I'll show you a couple pictures of the office. This is the office in Soho, 18 Rathbone Place. It used to be 18 Knowles Street, so that's a nice touch. We have a screening room that you can see on the bottom right, which is where we usually do the dailies and meetings with directors. And then we have downstairs where we have most of the artists, and we have an open plan, so we don't really divide the 3D and the 2D side too much, because working together is usually the recipe for success. And, we kind of push that because it's something that, you always learn from and you get to interact together, which is kind of what this talk is about how comp and effects talks together. I'm going to show you a quick show reel. I know the quality might not be the best for screen share, but I will leave the link with Daniel, so then you can share that if anyone wants to see it after. So I'll play that now. Cool. So that kind of gave me a minute to breathe. I feel like I was going a little bit too fast. Um, but you basically, that was our 10-year reel. So a lot of films from for our past 10 years. A lot of Danny Boyle, which is good because he's a very good director. So it's always good to have him there quite a lot. So we're quickly going to say a little bit about ourselves and our journey into where we are now. We'll start with me. So my name's Tiago, and I'm the one of the lead compositors at Union. And when I was younger, I really wanted to be a director. I kept writing films so I would have an idea for a VFX shot, and I would just write stories around that VFX shot, which is not good if you're trying to do story writing, because it's just forcing something into place. So then I came across District 9, and I saw it in the cinema with my friends. And that's when I realized that that's what I wanted to do. I don't want to do story. I just want to do really cool stuff and make it look real. So that's where I basically began my process. I then joined university, the UCA, University for the Creative Arts in Farnham, where I studied digital film and screen arts. And when I left university, it was quite tough for me to get a job. There wasn't a lot of opportunities. I feel like I learned the wrong software. But then when I joined Escape Studios, where they taught Nuke, my career basically got a jump start because it was the little push I felt like I needed. So I did a course at Escape Studios for 12 weeks. And after that, I joined a couple of companies. The biggest one of those would have been Lola, where I got to work on a really fun TV series about 4 superheroes. I mean, to me, they are superheroes. And it was these 4 dudes. I got to work 7 months on this, and it was a lot of fun. It doesn't seem like the most fun project to work on at first, but it was really good, and you get to learn a lot. But after that part of my career was over, I then moved on to Union. And I've been at Union for 5 years. I joined as a junior comp, and I've basically climbed the ladder all the way to lead, which is where I am now. And these are some of the films I've worked on since joining Union. The one I'm the most proud of is this one on the left, called Radioactive, which is in cinemas now. Well, it was supposed to be in cinemas in March, but the coronavirus had a different plan for that. But it is a really good film, and it was my first lead, so it's a project I hold really close to my heart because it's something I'm really proud of. And I got to work with Marcelo quite a lot on this as well, where we recreated the Hiroshima explosion. That's at the beginning of the film, so it's not a spoiler. But it was a lot of fun, and I think it's definitely worth a watch. I'll pass on to Marcelo now, because you're probably all tired of listening to my voice, so I'll just pass on the mic to him, and he'll tell you a little bit about himself.
So hey everyone, I'm Marcelo. I'm from Portugal, and I also work at Union. I'm lead FX currently. I have a slightly different introduction into the artistic world and to CGI in general from Tiago. Like I've always drawn like since I was young, so I've always been kind of connected to arts. I started Photoshop really early, but I wasn't still really sure of what exactly path I was going to pursue. I ended up going for a university in Portugal where I took like the digital arts and multimedia course. At that point, I was pretty much convinced I was going to become a developer, a coder. I was going to build websites. I was enjoying it. I was getting good. It was pretty cool. By some random chance, I ended up taking a 3D course on my second year, and that kind of took over. By the third year, I chose 3D as my final project. I developed like a short animation where I basically did the whole thing from script to rigging, sound designing, editing. It was pretty cool. It was like a very long process. Was this guy that lived inside a cuckoo clock. And basically his life was getting out of bed, taking a shower, going down the elevator into the machine room, pressing the button, the cuckoo would come out. It would go up one floor and go to bed. So yeah, it was pretty terrible, the whole thing, but it got me to explore a little bit of the whole process, and he introduced me basically I was introduced to it, and that's kind of when I decided to explore further. So if we can go to the next slide. So yeah, then that kind of got the bug started. Then I kind of just decided to explore. So I tried modeling. I went from 3D tracking until I kind of found effects. I came across this software called RealFlow, which is just for fluid simulations. You can do water simulations, wine, liquid, all this type of crazy stuff. And that was kind of like, I didn't even know how those things were done. I didn't know you could do it in a computer. So that kind of was the big decider for me. I just decided to follow all dynamics. I started using Maya, which many of you might be familiar with, run some Encloth in there. So basically anything that would be simulation kind of got me really interested. And eventually I kind of found Houdini around 5-6 years ago. And as a software, if you're an FX person, it's just like a dream come true. It's like quite hard at the beginning, but it will pay off. So after, I did have my first job was in Portugal. I didn't last there very long. The industry is nowhere near as big, so it's just different types of opportunities, but it still got me my first one. I worked there for around 9 months to a year. Then I decided to try a different market, and London was really attractive. All the big companies are here, both for film and advertising. So I moved in here. My first company, it's a funny name nowadays. It's called Uber. It is not a cab company. They kind of existed before the cab company, but the unfortunate choice of names, I guess. Now, once you hear Uber, all you think is the cab company. But yeah, I worked there for around 5 years. We did a lot of motion graphics, product, videos, advertising type of work. It's really challenging. I got to explore a lot of different things, so it was really cool. After that, I kind of joined Union a few years now. I joined in 2007, and I started as an effects artist in what was supposed to be a 6-month contract. I've been full-time for a long time now. Similar to Tiago, I managed to luckily progress my way, and I'm currently FX lead. Union, it's great in that way because, as you can see, we're great examples of that, but we're not the only ones. It happens quite often where you do get a lot of chances to input creatively, to progress in your career. Again, the environment is really good, and it kind of fosters that creative freedom, which is great. And on the slide, you can see some of the projects that I worked since joining Union. Some Danny Boyle as well, as Tiago mentioned. It's a mix of series and films, which is quite diverse, again, especially from the FX side. And the project that we're going to talk to you about was my first lead project, which was kind of cool.
So yeah, I mean, this is what we're here to really talk about. We were approached by clients about basically creating this season finale shot, which we didn't really know what it was until we sat in the room and the supervisor showed it to us, and it was they approached us. They said they want something like this, and we're like, wow, that's a really cool chance. Your eyes kind of light up and you get really excited because it's not every day you do a massive, never made concept rocket fly out of the water. So it was really exciting for us at the beginning. So the original brief was, they approached us to basically do the season finale of episode 10 of season 1. And it was a concept rocket. And it was basically about wowing the audience. It was about making the audience think that you're looking at a small rocket, and then you think it's a slightly bigger rocket until you realize that you've been fooled the whole time, and it's this massive 150-meter rocket that weighs an insane amount of tons and has an insane amount of fuel. So very dangerous. They probably will never make it. But yeah, and they basically, because they wanted it to feel enormous, we had to really play around with the cameras. And we get a little bit into that in a minute, but we had to use a very long lens to zoom in all the way and make you think that you're looking at something that's kind of big but not huge, and then zoom out and zoom out and zoom out until the whole screen is filled by the rocket. But I'll pass on to Marcelo because he has this passion about the concepting, and he's a massive space geek, so he'll talk a little bit about that.
So yeah, like it was when I first heard about the brief, and the client already had a really rough basic previs with which we kind of used actually as our basis. So it gave you an idea of what they kind of were after. And yeah, like Tiago said, like anything space I like, anything that is simulation I love. So this is like rocket launch has always been something that I've always had like in the back pocket. I've always wanted to do a personal project with it. So yeah, when I heard about it, like again, I was also already familiar with the rocket design because it's quite famous if you're into these things. So yeah, it was really exciting. Once you take a few days and the excitement goes down, then you kind of have to also start looking ahead and plan. It does have its challenges. So the first one, after we kind of start planning for what we need, like it was the really tight deadline. We had initially, the turnaround was supposed to be slightly longer than a month and a half. Yeah, something along those lines, which again, for how long of a shot it was, for the characteristics of the shot and the way the camera moved, it's quite tricky because we were going to need a lot of sims, both for water, for the fire and the smoke. We couldn't cheat the way that normally you cheat with these type of things, because you get a lot of cuts and you go from one angle to another. So those cuts, you can break a sim, start another one, keeping all of those things manageable because of the nature of our camera, whilst we're constantly through a single shot looking at always the action at all times. Yeah, it was tricky. And to help us, we needed like some really powerful computers. And we ended up using the cloud as well for the first time, to allow us to pull off all these massive sims and renders. On the creative side, you still have to make it look cool despite the short deadline and all those things. The main challenges for that was just, for the bigger part, like nobody saw a rocket like this big coming out of the water. So it's not like you can go and search for references of this type of stuff and then just try to copy, because it is kind of a first. And then tying in with the technical challenges, we have to find creative ways to go around both of the challenges and trying to come up with a believable, high quality shot like final product. On to the next. Do you want to start talking about the previous?
I need to get used to this muting and unmuting. So I took care of most of the previous. We wanted to keep it on the 2D side. When I say 2D, I mean Nuke. It can do 3D stuff, but it's very basic. And it was basically at first my job to kind of do the camera and animate it. And you can see here we're doing the focal length, we're taking care of all of that. And once we were happy with the look, we could pass this on to 3D, so they could start doing their magic and start finessing all of the animations and stuff. And it was very important to lock the camera quite soon, because the simulations were so heavy that, Marcelo will probably go into that, but we're cutting them as big as the screen is. So we're basically just growing and shortening the simulations as the camera cuts in and out, which is something very tricky to do, but it had to be done because of the size of all the simulations and stuff. But yeah, doing this in 2D basically meant that we could show a version to the supervisor, he could give notes, and we could address them almost instantaneously. If he was like, I feel like the camera needs to zoom in a little bit faster at this point, it needs to kink up a little bit at this point, it was very quick for us to give him a version within 1-2 hours, so we could all look at it together and say whether it felt right or not. And that was basically what we did for the previs on the shot. Then we move on to asset creation and all of that stuff, which Marcelo can probably tell you a little bit more about that, about the assets creation.
Yeah, so whilst once we made the decision to try and get our camera locked in like Nuke, that allowed us for Tiago to, and the 2D side of the project, to be focusing on that. And simultaneously on the other side, we can, in the background, just keep cracking with the stuff that we definitely know we're going to need. So we had like low resolution models, like light stuff that it's easy to work with for our previs, so we can get our timings and our camera angles right. In the background, we have another team that is working on all the assets that we needed. So obviously the bigger one was the rocket itself. Again, that's, even though it was never created and it never really existed for real, it was like a real prototype from back in the days. It was a real design, was designed by real scientists, believe it or not. And so we have blueprints, we have schematics, we have sizes and all of that, so we can base our models on the real thing. But then you still have to also get into shaders and all of that. Funny thing about the design, if you guys know, because again, like, it is, the reason why it had to come out of the water was because it was like the engines were going to be so powerful that if you kind of launched it from anything that has a ground, it would just destroy the floor. Like if you have a normal launch pad, it would just, the rockets were too powerful, which is why the idea for this one was to be launched out of the water. Which again, like all of those wet maps as the water is going, we had all of those iterations, dirt maps. We were also developing the aircraft carrier that you see in the background from the beginning. There's helicopters flying around. We have the buoys, which is those weird, they used to measure wind. Are they like, what else would you call it?
It's for the tide.
Yeah, exactly, to measure the speed. And we had also some birds, which we had to animate and flying around. So yeah, whilst the previous is getting locked in, we had all of this going on. So by the time that camera is approved and we can get the effects going, all of these assets were just ready to swap in, were the placeholders, and there was no waste of time.
Yeah, and the birds were actually quite an important thing. I remember in the client reviews, we kept trying to sit them in, and it was like, we need to see the birds. They're a massive part of the story, and we thought it was just a nice touch, but it kind of shows you how big the whole thing is. Once you see the tiny seagulls fly off the buoy, almost everyone doesn't notice that, but they are there. And that was basically the idea, was to kind of emphasize the magnitude of everything. So then comp. So after we start getting the first passes from effects, we have to go into comp. And believe it or not, this was the plate. And the plate is usually what they shoot in a camera. And this was it. It was this still image. That's all we had to make this minute and 10-second shot work. So you can see it's quite tricky to just have a blank canvas and just go for it completely. But once effects had the camera and we started to build the shot in comp. And this basically allowed us to see where there would be holes that we had to fill in comp, or where we had to rework the simulation, or where we had to improve it. And this was quite an important step, because it basically shows us which direction to take. But yeah, we had to rebuild this room in 3D so we could make the camera go through it into the ocean. And those were basically the first steps of comp, which we then passed back on to effects, where they, keep enhancing what they're doing and have to fix those holes and, make sure everything works correctly. And yeah, that's all that sort of stuff. So yeah. This is Marcelo. After the camera's approved, they basically begin on this. Go for it.
So yeah, once we get it, once we know exactly when the camera starts going through the TV screen, then we start knowing exactly the size that our ocean is going to have to be, like exactly how much we need to render. And then there was a few key, well, there was a lot of elements to this project, but there was two big ones. We know the ocean was going to be a big feature, like because of the nature of the camera, we basically were going to be seeing ocean throughout the whole shot. So there was going to be a lot of rendering. Ocean can be really long to render. You got transparencies, you got a lot of reflections. Again, just the sheer size of this, plus the simulation times. So yeah, like we kind of needed to know exactly what we needed to do in sim land and what we could do in procedural ways to trying to help speed time. So a lot of the Ocean, there's procedural solutions to it. There's a lot of noises that are built in with Ocean spectras, which helps us getting a really good look. And then we used simulation when it was inevitable. Whenever you see the rocket and it's really interacting with the water, then we have to simulate. The other big part of the whole project was going to be the thrusters. Like a rocket is big, like the exhaust of that, like again, we had to feel the power. It had to look good, and the simulations, we had to try to be like as smart as we could. So we could be efficient and try to deliver the best. Use our time not to try and fix technical problems, but use our time to try to get more versions so we can push the creative side as opposed to, you know, just trying to do stuff that no artist wants to spend time with. But yeah, so like once we got like these first few layers, we have a better idea of what actually is going to be needed from effects throughout now until the end of the project, and what can comp also start working on their side, so we can come together at some point.
Yeah, so then again, it really is a bounce back and forth between comp and effects. So we basically now have full renders of everything that Marcelo and the rest of the 3D team have been working on. And we can start really putting the whole thing together. It might actually be quite interesting to say that we've comped the whole thing in Deep. So essentially, Deep might seem a little bit like an alien word for someone who's not really involved in the industry, but it's basically blurring that 2D line, the 2D and 3D line even further. It basically just means that usually when a 3D artist gives you an image to work with, that's a 2D image, like a photo. And the best way to explain Deep is, imagine you're taking a picture and someone jumps in front of the picture. If you want to remove that person, that will essentially leave a hole where that person used to be. Same thing happens when you get an image from effects. But when you work in Deep, you can actually remove layers and everything behind them gets revealed the more and more you do, which may seem not like a really powerful thing, but once you're comping and you're putting hundreds of layers in front of each other and behind each other and between each other, it really does make the whole process a lot easier. But it also means a lot of data. It's a lot of data and terabytes and terabytes and terabytes. IT shouting at us saying we are filling the server, and you know, all those sort of things, just because it's a lot of data. But it is a really fun way to comp stuff when you get to the images and you start putting things in depth. But after doing that, the shot, you know, you start getting a shot that you're kind of happy with, and it's about finessing and tweaking and adding more detail here and adding more detail there, which is at what point we go back to effects and the 3D modelers, where they start painting dirt onto the rocket, all of those imperfections that make it look a little bit more photoreal. But for effects, this almost never ends. It's always a improve here, improve there. So, you know, we just keep going back and forth until what we consider is the final phase of effects, which is what we move on to next with Marcelo.
So yeah, like by this stage, we kind of we're far from finished, but we kind of have a shot. We got the main layers for most things. We got the Ocean. We have simulated where we need to, where we can get away with something a bit quicker. We have. So like most of those things are set in place. The big thruster it's coming out. So another big thing, for example, was we had the sound was kind of done ahead by a different company, obviously. So we kind of had to match our timings to the sound, and we couldn't really move. The same thing with the camera. That's why all of those things were very important to be locked in the beginning and not being changed. Because if the camera changed, then the rocket will have to be in a different place. So the exhaust wouldn't be in the right place, which is why it was very important in the beginning to just lock all of those things. But yeah, by this point, we got the main ones. We can start connecting the two worlds. I can start passing on my rocket simulations to the other artist that is working the water simulations. We can start blending the two of them. By the time that there's also some side thrusters, so you got the big engines on the bottom of the rocket, which are the big ones. But on the sides, there's also a few of them that help like with direction. So those ones come out of the water first, so you get like the water reacting to it. So at this point, we kind of start finessing all of those things and doing the secondary elements, all the white water, so all those weird foam patterns that you see on top of the water. So those are all separate simulations that you can only really do after the first minute. At this point, we kind of start getting we start getting past just having the rough stages, but we start adding detail, which is really rewarding to see. And then at that point, we can also start developing the shaders. So like the smoke color, the fire color, how intense it's going to be, how all of that kind of behaves, and lighting the shot. So all of it just looks real and you can believe that it's there. Yeah, so like all of the shaders, between water and fire, it's quite a lot to do. But again, like once you start seeing the frames coming alive and you get it to Tiago, and Tiago just puts it all together and like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. And at that point, we are excited because it is kind of going to where we need it to go. But again, it is also at this stage that we also notice another round and we kind of go back to comp.
Yeah, and we're back at comp again. Not the last time, I don't think. There's obviously always an element that effects can't give you full realism with it, although that line is getting smaller and smaller. So it's always good practice for us compers to look for real life elements and start implementing it. So I picked this frame because there's a lot of white water from waves crashing against rocks. Obviously we couldn't get water crashing against rockets, so we had to kind of be a little bit smart with what we were doing. And turns out waves crashing against the rocks on the beach is quite a good element to use. And we used about maybe 40 different elements to just kind of make everything sit in. And again, we used the deep concept to place them in 3D position. So everything looked like it was in the same place. While we were doing this, and I know we were kind of running short a little bit on time, so I'll try to make this a little bit quicker. But while we were doing this, again, effects and the 3D team are just pushing and pushing and pushing to make sure that everything is looking as best as possible before it gets to comp. At the same time, we worked on DMP. DMP is basically a digital matte painting, which is everything you see beyond the rocket. So it would be the horizon, the aircraft carrier, and yeah, that's basically it for this shot. But we decided to do a single frame of the aircraft carrier in 3D, which we then passed on to the DMP team. And then they start painting all the detail, doing the light direction, and making sure everything looks correct and sits in the scene. And at the same time, they paint in cloud details. And this was actually quite a tricky thing to do because we zoom so much into the clouds that the clouds that fill the screen on this particular frame, when we zoom out, they're so small on screen, you barely see them, which meant that we had to keep resolution all the way from, 28 mil lens to a 600 mil lens, which is where we see the aircraft and the horizon really up close. So yeah, I mean, Marcelo can tell you a little bit about the last phase of effects. And yeah.
So yeah, at this point, again, like things are really coming together. We have iterated through all the elements. We're pretty happy. Like we're getting to the final days as well. So, we're starting to get a sense, all right, we are kind of getting there. And we did have an amazing client. We have to say this, the client was incredible. They were aware they were asking, and they knew what goes into making this type of work. So they were very aware that they were the first ones to tell us in the beginning, like that if for us not to worry that they know that once the camera was locked, like there would be no change. So we were a bit surprised and scared a little bit for a few moments when we got an email a few weeks from the deadline where the client was saying, I know that this was the one thing I said I wasn't going to change, but we want to extend the shot a little bit and change the camera a tiny touch. So it was like a little bit of a panic morning. But after regrouping and reassessing where we were and what was possible and what it wasn't, we kind of did agree as well. We saw why they wanted the extension. So we went with it, but yeah, it was a funny situation. So our main sim, the main rocket thruster for the first version, like for the first duration, that simulation alone, just that 2.5 days. By the time that we got the extension in and we had to re-simulate for the new length, that same simulation went from 2.5 days to almost 8 days long, which was, again, like, that's why we needed to use the cloud. And that's why having, even though we're not a huge company, we can pull this off because kind of the fact that we aren't huge allows us to be nimble enough to just change. Like we decided to do this, it was our first project in the cloud, and just the fact that we are nimble enough to make that change on the fly, that's pretty incredible. But yeah, so after that little scare from the client, we did get that sim, took a little longer than was initially planned, but we eventually got all the renders out, for all the extension, including the water, and by this point, it was time to go back to Tiago again.
Yeah, and I'll just basically tell you a few quick facts about the compositing side of it, because I think they're quite interesting, and then I'll leave you with a full breakdown of the shot. So we had over 2,000 plus nodes on my comp script alone. So that's nodes are basically operations that you can do, like a blur, a grade. So over 2,000 of them to make this shot work. And we have over 50 comps, pre-comps. And this excludes obviously all the renders we got from Marcelo, which will then take it into the hundreds. So there was definitely a lot of layers that, you have to take into consideration and you have to be quite organized about. So I'll leave you with the breakdown, and then we'll have a Q&A after that, because I think we're already running a little bit over. But this should be quick.
Start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
Cool. And that's basically it from us. We should now pass on the mic on to Daniel, because I think
security's really high. Look at that. There's a
whole
carrier task force out there.
It just doesn't seem very safe. What if it explodes in the atmosphere?
That's why we're launching it from the middle of nowhere, Karen.
Look, it's risky, Ed. This isn't just another...
Thank you very much, guys. It was really interesting talk. It was really exciting as well to hear your kind of like a story behind what you see on the screen. And before moving to the question from our attendees, I've got one quick question. I feel that lots of attendees would like to know about the timeline. So hearing about the brief, how long time does it take you to deliver your part of the project? So once you got the brief until the final version, could you tell us about the timeline of that?
So that really depends on the shot. On a shot like this, that you've got so much pre-planning that you need to do, so much R&D that you need to figure out. It could basically take anywhere between 2 weeks to until you have time to R&D, and then it's about starting to put the shot together. I know effects side of it takes a little bit longer, so Marcelo can tell you a little bit about that. So how long would that take in effects?
Yeah, so that was the big challenge for this one was not only the amount of simulations, but just how long and that you couldn't cut. Because again, like usually you get multiple cuts, you look from different angles and those can be separate and you can break them up. This one had like to be a single one. So initially we had a month and a half. That was our first deadline, which was doable, but it was again tight. So we're pretty, I think that by the extension, we got like 2 more weeks for 5 more seconds.
Yeah.
So we ended up being a 2-month total working on the project, 2 months and a week potentially, from hearing it the first time to deliver the final extended project. Again, this was, it was just, usually you get like, I think that even the client was aware, like you are supposed to get a little bit longer deadlines for, again, a shot this magnitude, which is why it was also like quite, it's a proud moment when you be able to do it. But yeah, this one was around 2 months.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. I feel that it's really good to know, and many of us probably on this event would like to hear about the timeline of that. So that's why I asked this question. So moving to questions from our attendees, I feel that we had 2 types of questions, really kind of related to your start of the career and then advice. So I'm going to move to the first one and taking into consideration that we have 2 groups of attendees. So someone thinking about starting a career, and also we have people already working in the industry. So starting from a really kind of like an introduction from very basic information, someone asked on a Q&A function about what is really comp and what is FX. So could you give us a little bit of information about that and share maybe in like 4 or 5 words what you do really in terms of what is comp, what is FX, just to be super clear.
Cool. So I think we should start with effects.
Yeah, so I do effects. So we try to recreate real world phenomena. It can be like a liquid simulation. So if you have a glass and you're pouring something, so the water coming out, it can be the water that you see on the ocean. It can also be the fire rocket. Effects, it's a little bit broad because again, you can do a lot of things. You can do clothes simulations. So it's usually about simulating real life phenomena in the computer world. It's never like spot on, it's an approximation. But yeah, it's as close as we can get in the CGI world. And then we try to, even though we do that kind of in a 3D space, usually the output is a 2D picture. We try to, that's kind of how we pass it on. That's the output of our work. And that's when we feed it on to Tiago.
Yeah, so I mean, comp is essentially it's compositing a shot. Is you get the plate, which is what they shot in camera. You get the elements from effects, and you get the DMPs. And your job is basically to get all those images and put them all together, so you can deliver them to the grading suites, and they can take it onto the final screen.
Great, thank you very much. I hope that we answered this question. And moving to the next one is also about restarting a career. So you mentioned, guys, about your early start and the type of education you decided to take. But how did you really know that you wanted to work in this industry? What pushed you into this industry? I think it's also quite important for someone who is really thinking about the future.
Cool. I mean, I can start with that one. So mine was, I just used to like making films. I really did. But I liked making films to suit my VFX shots. which is not good. And basically, that's when I realized that I don't want to be a director. I just want to make cool stuff. And that's basically how I realized that that's what I wanted to do. That's why I wanted to do VFX.
Yeah, for me it was slightly different. My dad was a little bit older now, so like there was no graphic design at the time, but then he was a graphic design before graphic design kind of was born. So I was always like, since I was very young, I was drawing. Like he always kind of driven me that way. But even though I could draw, I started Photoshop, all of those crazy little things really early, but I wasn't still really sure. When I went before university, I was thinking architecture. By the time I joined university, I was thinking I was going to be a developer. So like, again, 3D was a little bit of kind of found me, as opposed, like once I saw it, I decided to explore. And then I found effects in a little bit more specific way. But yeah, I think I was just always artistic. I do feel quite lucky that kind of found me, as opposed to me finding it, though. It can be a little bit of a 50-50.
And you don't really need to study for this. Like you can just, sorry for bumping in, but we know artists who basically, animators who come from physiological background. They basically studied the body, they studied health basically. And so they understand how the human body works. And that's, they had no background in VFX, but they made it into animation because they understood that stuff. So there's more than one entry point basically. And
yeah, and I would also sorry to drag this one longer, but even though I did study in a design school, like I had one 3D class, which was really good, like for me to find that interest, but it wasn't particularly good for me to learn that. Like Portugal, at least 10 years ago, didn't have a particularly like strong education classes for 3D. So it was really good for me to find out that I like about it, but most of what I know was self-taught. Like I kind of learned, particularly with internet nowadays, you got great learning resources. So it was more to allow me to explore different things, going to university, and then allow me to figure out that I like that, but then learning it itself, then yeah, it was mostly self-taught. So there's also that side of things that nowadays it's up to you really.
Great, thank you. We had also a couple of questions related to programs. So what kind of software are you guys using on daily basis? If you could give us a little bit of examples, I feel that would help also our guests to understand what they could learn to perform this type of role that you are doing at the moment.
Yeah, so if I can go first, for me, like for effects, the 3D team uses a few different ones. So if you're modeling, Maya is the most used one. It's a great tool to have in your arsenal because most studio companies do use it. And then we have 3D Houdini for effects, which is, again, like if you are an effects student or something that you want to pursue, I would recommend that because it's boundless. Like there is no limits to what you can do basically.
Yeah, and for us it's Nuke. We basically use Nuke because it allows you a lot of freedom and you can mix and match quite quickly in that software. And most companies use Nuke.
Great, thank you. And there was also a question about, from one hand side, you learn about softwares, but learning on the job. So what is the biggest thing that you learn after joining, for example, Union VFX? Is it something about teamwork? Because I'm assuming you guys need to work with teams. So from one hand side, you need to learn softwares, but learning on the job, what have you learned? What's the one biggest thing that you learned and that you could share with everyone?
I mean, I feel like I learned everything on the job. It's crazy because you get the beginning tools and you feel prepared. You go onto a job and you are prepared, and all you need is the basic because everything else you just learn. I learn things every day still. When you talk to someone about how would you do this, and there's a million techniques, and you basically learn everything, but communication is probably the most important. Communication and motivation are the two best things. The two things you need to make it to be successful.
Yeah, I would agree. Like if you get a chance, because again, you can learn a lot by doing a personal project, but it's really hard to find a replacement for having someone with 10 years of experience that works the same software that you're trying to get good at. no one can replace those 10 years of experience just coming to next to you and just telling you how to do this or how to do that, or not how to do it, but like one of the ways that you can explore it. Like that knowledge, you can't get it by just searching online. So it's really good to have that self-initiative and try to learn by yourself. But if you do get a chance and you can join a studio, like those benefits are also hard to replace. So it's a good balance, would be ideal.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We had a question also about, it's related to advice that you could give to our attendees. It's also about learning about a programming language for FX or comp. Do you have any advice on that?
Python. I think Python is the most common one. It will.
That
help.
was the next question as well from someone. Is it worth learning Python?
Yeah.
If you could give us a little bit of your views on that as well.
Well, I mean, from the comp side, Python basically will allow you to create expressions that do things automatically for you, which can speed up stuff. It can speed up how you work. If you want a simulation of anything like leaves or noise, anything, you can just type it in a way that it forces the geometry to do that. So it can make things very procedural, and it is a very good thing to know, but it's not 100% necessary. But it is a massive plus if you do.
Yeah, for effects, the same. You also have like usually two types of artists, more artistic ones and more technical. If you can do 50-50 is ideal. Python is the one that goes across. Again, you can use it in all softwares. If you know Python, you will never get old. It is always useful to have. For effects, the other one, like it would be Vex, particularly with Houdini, which is like C++, brother. So it's a similar language. But yeah, like Python, it's the one you can't go wrong. If you are particularly looking at effects and Houdini in specific, I would recommend Vex too.
Thank you very much. We had also lots of questions about jobs, and there were lots of questions about does Union hire at the moment. And I'm not sure if you guys would be able to answer this question, but I can help with that a little bit. So the next month we'll be hosting recruitment panel discussion, and we'll be inviting also recruitment team members from various studios. So please check our website for this type of advice and information. But I'm not sure if you, Tiago or Marcelo, know anything about any open positions at the moment at Union. So I'm not going to ask you this question. My advice would be about visiting your website. So please go to Union VFX website to find out more about it. But a question that I'm going to ask you guys is about advice. So advice on showreels. Do you have any advice for someone who's applying for a job and is putting together the showreel?
So I think it's good to focus on the skills of what position you're applying for. It is cool to see a promising, if you're a roto artist, it's quite cool to see that you have got capabilities, and it's really useful to know, but we're really just looking for the roto shots. So if there is a reel where all you do is roto and you're applying for a roto position, and there's another reel which looks kind of cool in comp, but there's only one roto shot, more often than not, we're going to go for the roto one, just because we can assess different types of working and different types of shots. So I would definitely say focus on the position you're applying for and ask people for their advice on LinkedIn. People are really friendly in this industry. So, I mean, I get emails every now and then saying, what do you think of the showreel? And, you know, you give them a hand because you needed that hand at some point as well. So it's just speak to people. Most of the time, they're really nice. So yeah, just ask for their opinions and advice.
Yeah, for effects, it's very similar. Again, like if what you would like to be really good at, it's like smoke simulations. That probably should be your focus. But yeah, with effects, it's just a little bit trickier because it's such a broad range of things that even if you just want to do one side of effects, if you just want to fire, it's still like quite a broad. So for effects, you need to have like the basics. You need to know the basics of CGI. And then, yeah, like just if for example, fire, it's smoke simulations is what you just focus your showreel on those. And yeah, just apply like a small start, sometimes even as a runner, maybe 6 months, and then we'll land your first job. So yeah, just keep talking to people in the industry.
Okay, I think that's a great summary of our event, because I'm afraid that we won't be able to answer all of your questions, but hopefully this session was really useful for you guys that join us today. And we'll be finishing on at this point, because I think we ran out of the time. Tiago, the last words.
If we didn't get to answer any of your questions, you can find me or Marcelo on LinkedIn. Just ask them there, and we'll try to answer any we can. Sorry we didn't answer them all.
Exactly, and I wanted to mention also that by using the hashtag VFX Festival, our team from Escape will be putting some questions on social media. So please follow this hashtag, and we'll try to answer questions from today's session. And also we had lots of questions on the session that we ran on Tuesday. So we'll be following them up on social media. So thank you very much, guys, for your time, for really exciting presentation. And that was really great, also Q&A session at the end. And thank you very much, guys, for joining us today. If you'd like to hear more about our future events, please visit our festival website. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.